Hi, everybody. Good evening. This is the Finding You podcast. I am Dr. Brad Reedy. Today is Monday, December 30th, 2024. It is the eve of New Year's Eve. And with that, we thought that the topical podcast for this evening would be about goals. New year, new me. The title's a little bit misleading, and I'm going to explain that as I go. But I'm going to talk about this idea of new beginnings, of goals, of really tonight's going to be about what are the goals that can be something that can be long-standing? What's something that we can do that we can be at least have some confidence that it's something that we want to continue to do? Because so much of the time we reach the top of a mountain or a hill, and we find when we get there that it's not all that we thought it would be. Before I get into that, though, I want to talk about the upcoming programs that we have. For those of you that are new to this, we have a Finding You intensive. This is a 5-day intensive, 7 people. January is full. January 15th is full. We have an online opening January 24th through 26th. And of course, February 19th through 23rd is our next in-person Finding You outside of Park City, Utah. I want to also add here that February 5th through 9th, myself and my wife are going to be hosting the Finding You for couples. So really, we get so many asks over the years about, can my partner attend or can we both attend? And in this case, it's set up to be for couples. So it's kind of like Finding You. It's very much like Finding You, but it's the space that you can do your work alongside of your partner. This is not for a high conflict couple, but more for a couple that just wants to build and improve their intimacy. February 5th through 9th. And like I said, I'll be running that with my wife. Also, we have the Conscious Parenting Workshop just right around the corner as we enter into January. January 10th, 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. It's an all day long with 1 hour for lunch. I'll be hosting that, talking about conscious parenting. We'll be doing lectures, breakout sessions, role plays, question and answer. And we limit the size so that I want you to get a feel for something that's different than these broadcasts, something that feels very interactive. Beyond that, we have the attachment-based therapy class, a master class that I'm teaching March 7th, 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. with an hour for lunch. This is for professionals in the mental health field. If you are not a professional in the mental health field and it really interests you, you want a more advanced class about attachment-based therapy or attachment theory, this can also be for you. With all of these programs, contact us at info@findingyouprograms.com to learn more or to register. All right, let's get into goals for the new year, new me. I'll say out first, if traditional goal setting and manifesting works for you, wonderful. But if you want a new take on goal setting and resolutions, this broadcast may be for you. And before I get into all the quotes and all the ideas that I have tonight, I want to emphasize something I've been thinking about all day as I've been preparing for this evening, and that is that this kind of therapy, this kind of work that I do, that I teach, that I talk about, that we do at Finding You therapy programs, is really about a fundamental transformation. It's about a way of being. It's about learning to engage and relate to life, to others, to yourself in a different way. And this takes time. That doesn't mean that it's hopeless. That doesn't mean that the rewards are so far off that they won't be realized. You experience rewards along the way. But when I teach or talk or read or study, I'm really drawn to this idea about a different kind of sensibility, a different kind of a way of thinking. The great teacher Alan Watts, the great Buddhist Eastern religion teacher Alan Watts, said that if a problem remains persistently insoluble, it must be thought of as a question asked in the wrong way. And what I add to that is we've got to draw back and ask bigger questions. If we're having conflict with our spouse, if we're not clear about our work and our role and what we want to do going forward, if we're having parenting difficulties, so many of the questions that get presented to me are small questions. How do I deal with this? How do I interact with this? What can I say here? And those are fine along the way. But in a big spiritual sense, it's really a draw back into how am I thinking about life? What answers to the most important questions have I accepted? And can I look critically at those answers? Can I reconsider those answers? And so for me, tonight's broadcast is really opening the door to a new kind of way of living, a new kind of sensibility in 2025, and setting that up with the thoughts here. I have several quotes that I want to go over this evening that illustrate aspects of what I'm describing. Rumi said, your mistakes can also lead you to the truth. I, I embrace this idea so much. Maybe it's because I make so many mistakes, but I embrace this idea. I would say often to the young people that I worked with that if I have anything of value to offer, and that's a big if. I'm not saying that I do absolutely, but if I do, if you find me helpful, what I will tell you is that virtually everything that I have of value to offer comes from the mistakes that I've made. There are very few exceptions to that idea, which makes it difficult to regret my past actions in a sense, because the wisdom that I have today is because of those mistakes. So if I took those mistakes away, I wouldn't have the wisdom that I now have in order to maybe regret them. And so many people that I talk about, especially psychotherapists, get so focused on figuring it out and doing it the right way. There's so much anxiety. And really what I would say to you this evening is that idea of getting it right, of winning, of coming out on top, of doing the right thing, in many ways is the poison and not the cure. It's the disease and not the antidote. We have to pull back and see that when we are in a negative spiral, when we're in a negative cycle, when we're tempted to old habits, to old ways of being, when symptoms emerge in us or in our relationships, those are messengers trying to teach us something that we're missing, trying to teach us something that the soul wants to express. I had the wonderful privilege today to go visit one of my two childhood homes. I was lucky to live in two homes during my childhood, and I visited the one where I grew up from birth to 8 years old. I wrote a letter in advance and offered a little stipend and asked the owners that are current there if I could walk through the home. And a couple of friends asked me what were my feelings, and I said it was a mix. There was some happiness, some joy, definitely a feeling of nostalgia, but more than anything, I was honoring that young version of Brad, honoring and maybe even grieving so many of the hurts and the losses that I've experienced since then. This idea of leaning into the pain, of leaning into going into the cave that we fear to enter. It's not just symbolic poetic language. It's understanding that the problems, the missteps, the mistakes, the setbacks, the sidetracks are the journey. So many parents that I've worked with in the past have said, I want to get back on track. I want my son back. I want my daughter back. And what I might often say to them is, ideally, you'll never get your son back because they will have changed. Ideally, you won't get the same daughter or child that you have, that they will have changed and you will have changed. But what will happen for all of you, you'll have a new way of relating, a new way of thinking about each other, a new way of thinking about love and fear and emotions and symptoms. So this really is a fundamental shift far beyond any one skill, any one tool can offer. The tools and skills themselves, at best, become evidence of that fundamental and deep change. Another quote that I really love says, if a person wishes to be sure of the road that they tread upon, they must close their eyes and walk in the dark. Very similar to a Wendell Berry quote that says, if you're not sure if you're on the right path because you can't see anything, you can be sure that it's your path. That so much of this, so much of the transformation is so foreign to us, so outside of our consciousness and awareness, that we don't really know where we're going. I remember almost 20 years ago, my therapist said to me, quoting Donald Winnicott, she said, the false self brings the real self into therapy. And over the years, I realized that what I thought therapy was, what I went to it for, what I thought I was going to get out of it, it's become something different altogether, something much more beautiful, much more sublime, much more expansive than I ever thought it could be. And finally, Michael Meade wrote, to be purposeful is not to be goal-oriented, but to seek to reconnect to the source of one's life. This is about finding you. This is about discovering you. This is about developing greater self-compassion. And greater self-compassion, greater self-forgiveness, greater self-love is the catalyst for greater self-awareness. If you don't develop a certain amount of self-love and self-compassion, you won't improve in your self-awareness because you'll be too judgmental. You'll look at aspects of yourself or old choices, ways of thinking with criticism and critique, and you'll punish them. And in punishing them, they just go into the unconscious. But embracing and sitting and listening to them, can give you a larger sense of yourself. And one of the ways that I have found this to be most effectively facilitated is spending time with somebody who can sit with you, somebody who is non-judgmental, somebody who is compassionate, somebody who is patient, somebody who's not interested in fixing you and giving you the right answer, but sitting with you along your journey as you discover the answer, the deeper versions of yourself, the complexities of you. How were you wounded in childhood? What were the messages in childhood? How do those ideas, how does that training now show up in your relationship in problematic ways, whether it be with your romantic partner or with your children or with the other people that are close to you? I wrote something, and this comes from, it's an amalgamation of several people's quotes. But I wrote, our mental health can largely be understood as our ability to handle ambiguity, uncertainty, and paradox. I think one of the reasons why people are so, they're so attracted, they gravitate so much to goal setting, to objective measures, is because it gives them a sense of control in a world that is terrifying and difficult, scary, and uncertain. And we know from the hero's journey, we know from mythology that the point of darkness, the point of greatest despair, is the launching point for individuation, for becoming who you are. And I wrote further, if the ambiguity and mystery of life overwhelms us, we may be tempted to reduce life to more manageable, simplistic polarities, black and white, us and them, right and wrong, either or. We want to eliminate the gray. And this reduction reduces our anxiety, but it brings with it a host of symptoms. We might look for generic solutions, step-by-step instructions, and will ultimately outsource the responsibility of our own individuation. The work is to go into your fear, into the unknown. My therapist has been saying for 25 years to me, she's been really talking about how much she values this idea of not knowing. And this comes from somebody who's the greatest scholar that I've ever had personal contact with in terms of literature and philosophy and psychology. That's the person saying not knowing is the great gift. But what she's saying is she's always has an open mind. She's not too certain. She's not too absolute. And I must confess, I've spent most of my life really trying to find certainty and absolutes. And of course, the way that affects the people around me is it creates a distance. It creates a polarity of right and wrong. It creates a win-lose. And it increases anxiety. For some, goal setting creates a high stakes atmosphere. Not for everybody, but for some. The thought is, if I create clear goals, I'll be accountable to them. I will create possibly a simplistic pass or fail scenario mindset. And this intensity and perspective will motivate me. But for sensitive people, this simple and intense high-stake environment is not the cure, it is the disease. This idea that you can get it right and win, that the idea in life is anywhere close to the idea of getting it right. That comes from fear. That comes from wanting to occupy a position in a relationship, in an issue where we can't be criticized, where we can't be attacked, an unassailable position we assume. But that certainty, that absoluteness that I've been embodying my entire life is, and in many respects, the most fragile state that a human being can be in, can operate from. So the goal is to not know. The goal is to be open. The goal is to listen. I would say that there's a lot of talk about New Year's resolutions and whether or not people keep them or not, or whether they make them. I'm not going to get into that. But I would say that if your goal at the beginning of the year it changes by the end of the year, that might be the greatest sign of growth. If you give up old ideas, if you give up an old way of operating, an old way of being, the goal that you set might just go with it. I love the slogans from the 12-step programs. One day at a time, do the next right thing, easy does it. All of this, all of those speak to this idea of being open, being flexible. Life for me is a spiritual journey. Mental health and mental illness are in the spiritual realm. As the great Carl Jung observed, I have frequently seen people become neurotic when they content themselves with inadequate or wrong answers to the questions of life. And for me, it is about questioning the assumptions. I was thinking about it this week. When you have a belief, and that belief might be embedded in one of your struggles with your spouse, with your child, with other close relationships, ask yourself why. So what's the reason for that belief? And keep asking yourself why until you get down to that core need, which is going to relate to some sense of feeling free from unconscious obligations. I use that phrase a lot, but it's important. Feeling freed from unconscious obligations, from the shoulds and the have to and the need to that run in the background of our mind all the time. Joseph Campbell himself said, we must be willing to let go of the life we had planned so as to have the life that is waiting for us. So much of this work is about destruction. And in a metaphorical sense, it is about death, the death of the old idea, the death of the old self, the death of the old persona, the death of the false self that we put in place and embodied so that we would be loved. As I've experienced growth, I found myself more capable of telling the truth in difficult situations, especially with my spouse and children. And when I tell the truth about really where it's coming from, that's the position that can't be assailed. That's just me. I'm scared. I was worried. I was trying to control this. I was angry. It's the feelings, right? Those lead us back to ourselves. I love this post that I saw the other day that somebody shared that said, I lost myself trying to please everyone else. Now I'm losing everyone while I'm finding myself. That is so often my observation. It's my personal observation of my own life. And I have so many clients that are absolutely wrecked by this loss, by the loss of the people around them, by the loss of their close friends, by the loss of even the connections that they experience with their close family. Right? They have that experience of being rejected. I was telling you earlier that I went to visit my childhood home. When I first reached out to the current family at the address, they were very skeptical, thought it was very odd. And this was weeks ago. But through some back and forth and me showing some evidence that I lived there between the age of birth and 8 years old, they were willing to welcome me in to walk through my childhood home. And when I greeted the gentleman who was hosting this evening, I said, I'm really grateful for this, grateful that you would indulge me in this. And I know it might be weird. And he said, weird is an understatement, is what he said to me. And I thought to myself, I suppose it is for a lot of people. And yet when I texted my family, who are my close circle, happened to be several of them are therapists, and I told them and sent them some pictures of the house, I received this outpouring of love and support for little Brad and the honor I was showing him, the real life psychodrama that I was exhibiting by going home again. I wrote this: I've searched my whole life for something. I didn't even know what I was looking for. I would have never guessed that what I was looking for was me. If you had asked me what my goal in psychotherapy was when I first started it years ago, I think if I could have articulated it, I would have said, I want some strategies to kind of manage the people, the circumstances, and situations around me. What's the best way to talk to my wife? What's the best way to say it to my child? And really, what I was asking is, how can I get everything that I want? What secret hacks, workarounds might the therapist have for me? That's what I thought, and that's what led me on a couple occasions to quit therapy for a short period of time, because the world outside of me wasn't changing significantly at all. Nothing was changing in any kind of substantial way. But I had no better option. So I would return to therapy and keep going until finally I realized it was me. I was the one that needed to change. And then the world could adjust or not. And much of the world, meaning much of the people around me, didn't adjust. And there were losses, many, many losses. Of course, there were some wonderful surprises too. And the connection, the people that were left standing at the end of this transformation that I experienced significantly at midlife, the people that were still standing at the end, those were my people. Those were the people that I could be at home with. I could be, in other words, me with. You see, I don't spend time anymore with people who tell me or anyone else what they should do, who offer advice, especially without being asked for it. But sometimes, even being asked for it, I refuse to give it because it's not the right question as I see it. It doesn't really, when I say right question, it doesn't really work. It doesn't really tell the whole story. So often I will ask a different question when I'm teaching a class or doing psychotherapy or running an intensive after somebody proposes a question, because I'm trying to get them into a new way of thinking. And again, I want to be clear. This is not just my way of thinking. I didn't create any of this. Of course, my personal stories are illustrations of the idea, but this is the same story that has been going on since we have recording of human beings sharing their thoughts and their dreams and their beliefs. Michael Meade is a Jungian analyst that I like and follow on social media. He said, the real risk in this world has always been becoming one's true self amidst all the uncertainties of existence. That's the great challenge. I'm not going to spoil this, but I am going to tell you one line from the Bob Dylan biopic, which just came out this week. Growing up, Bob Dylan was my hero, has been most of my life. When I was in 7th and 8th grade, I would come home, 8th and 9th grade, I would come home and listen to his albums. Before I would go out with friends, before I would do anything, I would just listen to an entire album. It was in those moments that I felt at peace and grounded and most seen and understood by hearing this amazing poet sing these songs. At any rate, in the recent movie that just came out, starring Timothée Chalamet, A Complete Unknown, there's a line in there after a dinner party. Again, it's not a spoiler. It doesn't ruin anything. It just illustrates this point. And Bob was saying as he was leaving the dinner party, he was expressing some aversion to the entire experience. And he said to his friend, everybody in that room wants me to be somebody else. Somebody asked him, what do you want to be? And he said, whatever they don't want me to be. He had an honest energy against this control, this idea of people wanting him to be something else. And I think where we're most guilty of that is with our children. It's next with our spouse, and the circle goes from there. But we think that it's our job to shape them up. I thought that. When I had my first child 31, almost 32 years ago, I thought that. I thought I was going to do a beautiful job of sculpting this child into what I thought was the best kind of human being. And through pain and struggles and symptoms and setbacks and difficulties, he let me know over the years that he wasn't having it. And I will tell you, by the time that my fourth child came around at the same age, I embraced the project, and it is much, much more difficult to be large enough to hold space, to know where and when and where to intervene. And I make mistake after mistake after mistake in the process. Ralph Waldo Emerson wrote, "To be yourself in a world that is constantly trying to make you something else is the greatest accomplishment." So what I'm trying to set up for the broadcast is this idea of becoming yourself in 2025, more of yourself. Knowing as I do that this is a lifelong process and we're always evolving. I shared this quote next because I think it's really important to talk about the process, the way that this is facilitated. I wrote, if we don't get seen by somebody in childhood, really seen, we might very well end up spending the rest of our lives trying to be seen by everybody. And of course, where did I discover this? In me. Really, just like all of the great teachers, not that I'm one of the great teachers, but like all of the great teachers, their first subject of study was themselves. The advantage that a psychotherapist has, of course, like myself, is we get to watch, observe other people in close proximity week after week, year after year. So we have the advantage of watching other people go through similar types of transformation. I just added this quote too. If anyone tells you that a certain person speaks ill of you, do not make excuses about what is said, but answer, he was ignorant of my other faults. Otherwise, he would not have mentioned that alone. The more we come to find peace with ourselves, it really doesn't matter what other people say or think or feel about us. When that gentleman, who I'm very grateful for, who let me walk through his house, my childhood home today, said that my request initially was beyond weird, it tickled me. Of course, it wasn't a very serious, aggressive comment, but I thought to myself, I find myself lucky to be thought of as weird and odd in this experience. James Hollis wrote in his book, What Matters Most, learning to live with ambiguity and learning to live life how life really is, full of complexities and strange surprises, is really the spiritual journey. Not knowing. I love it when people come home from our intensives not knowing, a little bit less certain about who the bad guys and who the good guys are, a little bit less certain about who's right and who's wrong, really coming away with this sense of their own history, of their own background, and how it interacts with the world around them, with the people that matter to them. This next quote from James Hollis might be the idea behind the entire thesis of tonight's broadcast. He wrote, in Finding Meaning in the Second Half of Life, he wrote, if the ambitions of youth, which are many, and many of which we are able to achieve, truly serve the soul, then we would see a lot more happy people. Midlife is that point in life when we begin to discover that we've reached the top of the ladder, but the ladder is leaning against the wrong building, the wrong thing. And we begin to take our life back. We begin to realize as the years shorten that this is our life. And again, in the long term, that doesn't lead to hedonism and selfishness and a lack of empathy and connection to others. That's what we've been taught. That's why we're so reluctant to go on this hero's journey that I'm describing. But really, that's the beginning of the awakening, the beginning of the awareness, the beginning of questioning everything, all of our values, all the things that we've been taught. Now think about that. If that happens for us, that's going to happen for our children. What does that tell us that it might happen for our children? That tells us, in many cases, that we teach them with a certain degree of certainty that they'll eventually have to lay aside. When parents tell me this is our family's values, I remember what one young client said to me many years ago to his parents. He said, "These aren't family values, these are parent values." And I don't need to go into detail, but just to illustrate the point, I don't have the same values as my parents. Some are the same, but many are different. And not only am I not ashamed of that and regretful of that, it has been my greatest joy to discover those new ideas, those new ideals, those new values. James Hollis again, in the middle passage. But such is the first adulthood, full of blunders, shyness, inhibitions, mistaken assumptions, and always the silent rolling of the tapes of childhood. If one had not set forth and made those mistakes and crashed into those walls, then one would have remained a child. Reviewing one's life from the vantage point of the second half requires understanding and forgiveness of the inevitable crime of unconsciousness. How beautiful. Reviewing one's life from the vantage point of the second half requires understanding and forgiveness of the inevitable crime of unconsciousness. That is what we are guilty of. That is really, in the way that I think about things, that's what sin is. It's unconsciousness. It's acting and behaving from a place that lacks consciousness, that lacks awareness. And so this first adulthood, this history of ours is something that ultimately we must shed. We must give up. We must surrender. Carl Jung himself said, we cannot live in the afternoon of life according to the program of life's morning. For what was great in the morning will be little at evening. And what in the morning was true will at evening have become a lie. The answer that I have to the small questions today will be outdated by this evening or tomorrow. That's why I invite or suggest the possibility of asking bigger questions. And again, James Hollis, life is not a disease, and a neurosis is not a cancer to be excised. Any seeming resolution today will have to be revised tomorrow, for the psyche is a flowing river, and yesterday's resolution is tomorrow's constriction. So you see, I struggle with the idea of simplistic goal setting. I'm never drawn to it, and I know that some people swear by it. And if that works for them, like I said at the outset, wonderful. I offer my congratulations, my blessings, and nothing but my love and respect. But for me, it's about asking different questions. It's about thinking differently. When I was young, in my first few years of my career as a psychotherapist, working at a program with young people, I was brought into the corporate meeting. I was brought to corporate, and we did an all-day training. And one of the questions was, what is your mission statement? And I kept thinking of mission statements, and I really couldn't come up with anything that I thought would have legs, that would endure. So I wrote on my card that I was given, to be. My mission in life is to be. And when it came around for my time and I was terrified to give my answer, which I did give to the group, the facilitator made a comment suggesting that I wasn't taking the exercise seriously. But I couldn't change my answer. I had nothing else to say that was of value. So the goals, the ideas that I want to suggest for your consideration are to become who you are. To take it a day at a time, to be open to new ideas. To know that you're going to learn something tomorrow that shows that your thoughts, your beliefs, your approach to life today is outdated. but it comes from a less aware place. Take it a day at a time. This is a marathon, folks. And I suppose that's fitting. I've done these broadcasts for now over 17 years, and that suggests the fact that it's not like I presented, I've concluded, I've finished, I've run to the end of the curriculum. These are really just an ongoing living journal of the journey that I and the clients that I have the privilege of working with are on. It's not about dieting. It's not about a temporary fix to get to your goal and then going off of it. It's a new way of being. It's a new lifestyle. I think a fundamental idea, and the analysts and the philosophers talk about this, is taking responsibility for your happiness, your serenity, your peace, your meaning. If your spouse or your child is the one that's dictating your happiness, your meaning, your peace, you have abdicated from yourself the chief responsibility of living your own life, breathing your own breath, stepping your own steps. For me, my tool is that I go to therapy. I go to therapy even when, maybe especially when I don't need it, in the classic sense. I go there to reconnect. I go there to stay in the mindset. And like many of my clients, I spend a lot of the time talking myself. And because my therapist is so patient, it's a wonderful context, a wonderful environment for me to make the connections in my life. And because she is so patient and so non-judgmental and so compassionate toward me, I've developed more self-compassion. You see, that's how human beings are built. The way that our parents or our caregivers or the big people in our life, the way that they see us and react to us, become the way that we think and see ourselves. I remember thinking about it a few years ago when I was working with a client who was struggling with a problem that was repeating itself over and over again, not for weeks or months, but for years. And I remember communicating to them, and I said, "Look, I'm in no hurry. This is the way it goes for all of us. This is how it goes, and I can sit with you. Literally, I can sit with you patiently, and I can do that because somebody sat with me patiently, and because they sat with me, I can sit with me, and because I can sit with me, I can sit with you, and wait." Learning to fail better. I cannot, especially with our children, I cannot overestimate the value of failures, the value of missteps. It's not that we give our children choices so that they'll just make the right ones. It's that we give them choices because failing and hitting the wall is a part of what helps them find themselves, just like you and me. And of course, as a parent, we have responsibilities and obligations when it comes to their safety. And so it's an impossible task. We are, I think, most of us would say, we are tasked with the responsibility of keeping our children safe. I don't like to say guiding them, but more so I like to say supporting them to where they need to go. And that takes largeness. We have to be bigger than them. I read a quote this week that said something like, I can't remember who said it, Einstein or somebody like that. It says to not become polluted, we have to be like the sea, large enough to take the poison river into us, to metabolize it. Learn to abandon old ideas, old contexts, old relationships that don't serve me. One of the deficits in dysfunctional families is this idea of loyalty to old ideas, concepts, and people. And I'm not suggesting that we cut people or ideas out at the sign of the first failure or the first conflict. Not at all. But for people in dysfunctional families, and this makes sense, there is an unhealthy loyalty. There is guilt to let go, to move on. If you grow in life, if you're really spiritually growing, you will leave people behind that aren't on that journey. If you have, and I have the privilege, the luck of having a partner that's willing to grow and willing to unlearn and to learn again, then I get to travel the path with a partner who's on that same journey. One of my children said about their partner at one point that their partner was realizing that there are no rules. And I said to my child, I said, that's the best news I could ever hear about somebody you're dating. If they realize that there are no rules, that anything is possible. That was one of the messages of the great heroic journey tale, The Matrix, with Keanu Reeves. If there are no, that was one of the messages of Everything Everywhere All at Once. If there are no rules, then anything is possible. We learn to lose. And it's not a white knuckle kind of experience. We don't care. It doesn't matter to us. It doesn't define us. We learn to drop balls, to let people down. You know, one of my goals for 2025 is to continue to let people down, to drop balls, because it's when I don't that I put myself through hell, that I risk my health, that my codependency is in full bloom. Like I mentioned, embracing not knowing, embracing my dilemma. What I mean by embracing my dilemma is understanding my history, understanding that the ideas, that the way I was parented, the way my family operated, that house that I went to today, that I walked around in for 20 minutes, that there were messages and energies in that childhood that are still driving things. The ego death. Now, there's a dramatic ego death that oftentimes is associated with something like psychedelics, which can happen. But the ego death is the small humiliations along the way. It's that quote from Carl Jung where he said the success story is not a career success story. The spiritual journey is not a career success story, he said. But it is a series of small humiliations where the real self is revealed. Richard Rohr, the Catholic priest who was also a psychoanalyst, said that he prays for one small humiliation per day. And that's what it feels like when something you're so certain of is shown to you to be ridiculous, or you behave in such a way that it reminds you of something that you thought you had grown past years ago. I wrote in here that I schedule guitar lessons each week. My great gratitude for learning guitar over these last 4 years is that I'm doing something that I'm not good at every week. And I schedule the guitar lesson and I show up even if I haven't practiced that week. For me, it's a spiritual practice. And I will say after 4 years, I'm actually loving it quite a bit. So it's a little bit less dramatic than that. But that still happens. I would say I want to cancel my guitar lessons half of the time because I feel underprepared. I haven't done some of the assignments and I haven't studied, but I show up. I tell the truth, often anxiously. My guitar teacher, who's an old friend, smiles and patiently takes me through the lesson. Facing fear. If we don't face fear, we turn it into rage and hate. We turn it into control. Our life, our soul, our psyche gets smaller and smaller. And if we focus on causes, not outcomes, but where the thinking is coming from, where the decision is coming from, not whether or not it works. Some of the things I'm most proud of in life as a father and as a spouse have resulted in painful, difficult disasters. But I told the truth. I showed compassion. I kept my heart open. Focus on relationships with the child, not the behaviors. Gosh, that I could spend an entire podcast on that idea. Focus on the relationship with the child. I used to think just the opposite when I was younger. And now I realize that what I would call healthy behaviors come in large part in the soil of the positive, connected, resonant, co-regulating relationship. Be willing to abandon any goal I have set for myself as an act of self-care, as an act of my own evolution. And grapple with guilt and shame. If we're not up against our guilt and our shame, I would argue we're not growing, because those are the things that are going to keep us in the old way. Tell the truth about how I feel to those that I love. That's one of my goals every day, and it's not easy. I am so wired to people please. I am so wired to lie, to tell people what they want, and I'm not even aware of it most of the time. James Hollis said, to become a person does not necessarily mean to be well-adjusted, well-adapted, approved of by others. It means to become who you are. We are meant to become more eccentric, more peculiar, more odd. We are not meant to just fit in. We are here to have to be different. We are here to be individual. So as I come to the close of this, I'll say to you, find what works for you. If goal setting and being really concrete about things keeps you in a direction of spiritual awareness and peace and greater relationship satisfaction, keep doing it. I don't want to push anybody off of anything that works for them. But if it doesn't, maybe set larger goals to become who you are, to learn to tell the truth more, and then be willing all year long to give up on any goals that don't serve you, to abandon any values, even long-held values that no longer serve you. Listen to the messengers of the sidetracks. Listen to the messengers of your child's symptoms. Listen to the messengers of your marriage. All of those things are signals that there's some part of you that needs attention, some part of you that you've avoided up to this point. And then, of course, step into the dark. One of the greatest evidences of you being on your path is that you don't know where to go. That's a strong signal. When someone says, I used to apologize for this years ago when parents, through my training, my teaching, my communication skills, classes and courses, they would say at some point, I don't know what to say anymore. I'm at a loss. And I used to apologize for that and find a way to kind of put that all together so it made sense. And now my thought is, great. That's a really good sign. That means you're listening. That means you're paying attention. And that means you're starting from scratch. And that's a great thing. Step into the dark. Prepare for the pushback, the change back messages. Your context, even the context. I'm not talking about toxic, crazy contexts. I'm talking about everyday contexts that most people are in. Sometimes even the ones that look the best from the outside. That context will try to push you back into the old way. From family systems theory, it's called homeostasis. Right? It's an energy that pushes you back to the status quo. Setting healthy boundaries, new ideas. And I'm not talking about aggressive, critical feedback. I'm talking about you learning a different way of being. The people around you are very often going to be uncomfortable with it. It's going to scare them. It's going to seem like you're crazy. And of course, that makes sense, doesn't it? And then find somebody to walk beside you, a therapist, maybe a group of friends who are like-minded, maybe a support group. There are great authors and of books that many of whom are dead, but they can be your friends. Walk beside people who have walked this journey toward individuation. Individuation sounds individual. It just means becoming who you are, which is to be more connected to the universe. The more individuated I become, when I was younger, I used to think, well, what about a starving person in a foreign country, for example, or even in our country. And now I realize I am them. They are me. There's no separation. It's one of the things that weighs on my heart the most is the suffering of the world. And I have to do good self-care in that light because it's painful. I'm more connected to my wife and to her dilemma. She's more connected to me in my dilemma. Gosh, she's amazing. She's amazing. Find somebody to walk beside you. Keep going. When you feel like all is lost and there's nowhere to go, just keep going. Just keep making that guitar lesson appointment. Just keep making that therapy lesson. Just keep that journal writing. Just keep going to that 12-step meeting. Keep reading. Keep going. And then lastly, the thing for your consideration is to face directly, well, you don't have to, what is being asked of your soul. And oftentimes what is being asked of your soul is made manifest by the problems, the symptoms, the neuroses, the intrusive thoughts, the compulsions, the addictions. All of those are messengers from the soul asking something of you. And what I leave for your consideration is learn to sit with them like you would a crying baby. Hold them. Listen to them. They have something to teach you. Such a pleasure to be with you on the eve of New Year's Eve. So glad to do this. My two books, The Journey of the Heroic Parent and The Audacity to Be You, are available on Amazon and Audible. Like I mentioned, January 24th is the next online program. February 19th is the next in-person Finding You program. February 5th through 9th is for couples, Finding You for couples. My Conscious Parenting Workshop, we have a couple of spots left. January 10th, 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. Mountain Time. That is a limited number of seats because I want it to be interactive. And of course, my attachment-based therapy class, March 7th. Contact us, ask questions, go to our website, or email us at info@findingyouprograms.com. That's info@findingyouprograms.com. Next week, I'm going to be talking about intimacy in couples. I absolutely love this topic because it's so counterintuitive. We think of intimacy as warm and fuzzy and pink and hearts and hugs and kisses. And while those are the wonderful aspects of intimacy, it's also terrifying and difficult. It requires us to face ourselves. So intimacy in couples next Tuesday, a week from tomorrow, next Tuesday, January 7th at 6 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. If you have any questions, if you want copies of these slides, if you want to make suggestions, you can always email us at info@findingyouprograms.com. I hope this was a helpful point of contact. I hope you have a safe and happy New Year's Eve, and I'll talk to you next week on the 7th. Have a great evening, and for on behalf of the people that you love and the people that love you, thanks for showing up and being willing to do your work and to ask yourself these difficult questions. It makes all the difference in the world. Have a great night, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.